Hello, and welcome to another astounding episode of Furries in the Media, the series that reviews videos and other media based on how the furry fandom is represented. Today, we'll take a look at a 2003 documentary made by TLC called Animal Imitators. 2003, back when the Learning Channel was about learning. Well, that's debatable, but we'll unpack that later. This special focuses on individuals who have modified or have otherwise altered their physical appearance in order to look more like their inner animal, such as Lizard Man, Leopard Girl, and the late Cat Man, or Stalking Cat as he preferred to be called. None of those folks are furries, but the special does include a segment with an engineer who goes by the name Wolftail, who created Stalking Cat's bionic tail, and another segment with a furry named Snap E Tiger. Is Wolftail not a furry? Regardless of whatever label he does or doesn't go by, it's very clear to me that Wolftail's animal identity holds a deeper personal meaning for him. While Wolftail never calls himself a furry in this documentary, I'm fairly confident that he is one. If, however, he's not a furry, I feel that he's furry adjacent enough to still include him in today's review as an honorary furry. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
The jaw opens and closes. The lips will raise and lower. The nose raises and lowers. And the ears, well, they can tilt left, right, forward and back, and then they can rotate. The entire wolf head is all built out of paper clips, just like the tail is. You see the eyes. The lenses are prescription lenses, because they need to wear lenses.
As a glasses wearer, I think including prescription lenses inside the fursuit head is a really cool idea, but I'd be too intimidated to put that on. It looks like one of the animatronics from Five Nights at Freddy's. All jokes aside, fursuits have come a long way in terms of quality and all kinds of whistles and bells, both analog and digital. These innovations wouldn't be possible without fursuit makers like Wolftail, who were willing to get messy and make mistakes while pioneering new techniques.
I can't howl pretty good. Oh, the neighbors are going to kill me, though. There's a dog that they'll blame it on that lives over there.
Why did they have him howl? I don't know. Now, I don't believe that they asked him to do that just to make him look weird or anything, but this was a poor choice in the editing room, no matter the reason. It doesn't seem like it was Wolftail's idea to howl for the camera, and I feel that including this footage in the final documentary doesn't really serve to help the audience to empathize with him.
As soon as I realized to myself that I was a fur and that I connected with tigers, I wanted to tell the world, because I knew that it made me happy, and my parents, my friends, everybody that cares about me, they want to see that I'm happy.
I remember having that same feeling of euphoria the day that I realized I was a furry and began calling myself a furry, and I imagine a lot of new furries would also feel something similar. I love that they included this part of his story because it shows a facet of the furry experience that doesn't seem to get a whole lot of attention in non-furry media.
Snap calls himself a furry, someone who likes to dress up in a fursuit resembling his or her inner animal.
And we've got the wrong definition of furry. That's true, Sam. If you don't know, a furry is a person who is a fan of anthropomorphic animals, or animals with human characteristics. Fursuits aren't mandatory. But Sam, I think we ought to give them at least partial credit. Why should we? This definition of furry implies that there is at least some amount of significance that a furry places on the animal that they choose to represent themselves, which is true. Many furries have fursonas, or furry personas, and oftentimes a good deal of careful consideration goes into the decision of what species their persona will be. Sure, the definition of furries that is presented here may not be factually correct, but I feel like they at least somewhat understand the spirit behind it, I see what you mean, Abby.
Before I found furry, I was set to be married. I was engaged to a lady I've been dating for probably 4 or 5 years. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me that I did not feel the love for her that I thought I did. And then I was on a search to find out what made me happy. And so that's where the tiger fit into the equation. All I know is that being surrounded with tigers and associating myself with tigers makes me happy. It makes me more of a complete person.
TLC's documentary could have easily depicted Snap in an unflattering light, but they presented his story in a way that the audience can easily understand and empathize with. I think it takes a certain level of maturity and plain old guts to not only step back and really question what makes you happy, but to then make such a life-changing decision based on that introspection. And I think TLC did an excellent job of conveying that here. Did it work out for him? Well, he looks pretty happy to me.
The number one place furries hang out is cyberspace. The internet has spawned the development of a furry community.
I would not have found the community without it. I would not have the friends, the lifelong friends that I have right now without it. I can't imagine the furry community before the internet.
The majority of interpersonal interactions within the furry community still take place online even these days, and this past year has certainly been a testament to the significance of these online communities. I saw a ton of new online conventions that sprang up when all of the in-person conventions had been canceled.
It really is only a problem if it's interfering with their ability to get along in the world. It may be difficult for them to get into a mature and healthy adult relationship because who would want to have a relationship with a tiger, for example? They would want to have a relationship with a husband.
I mean, I think Joe Exotic would be happy with both tigers and husbands. All joking aside, I appreciate the fact that they brought in a psychiatrist for his expert opinion. The way they're presenting his opinion has me nervous, though. Oh, you mean how they had the psychiatrist talking over footage of Snap getting suited up? Yeah, that. Yeah, it does feel a little targeted, but let's take a look at the next part.
But wanting to dress as a furry tiger doesn't necessarily mean you've got a problem.
But if it brings them in contact with other people who have similar interests, if they're not taking advantage of other people or using other people as objects for their own pleasure, then who's to judge that? And it may not be something that has to be regarded as negative, for example, to society or to the individual.
Whew, thank goodness. Yeah, that last part had me a little nervous there too, Sam. As much as I appreciate the fact that the documentary sought out an expert's opinion, I'm doubly appreciative that they also included this part of his opinion and reinforced it through their own narration. This shows me that the documentary makers were well aware of the impression that this section could have left on its viewers.
Mentally, on the inside of my head, I do live life as a tiger. But I also know when to turn it on and turn it off as far as showing it off to the world.
Would that make Snap Therian or Otherkin? I don't think so. I don't have the best understanding of Therian and Otherkin, but I think it's something more subconscious and involuntary than someone role-playing as a tiger in their head as they go about their day. I definitely appreciate the documentary including the bit of Snap saying, "I also know when to turn it on and turn it off." This shows that Snap is on the same page as everyone else. He understands that acting like a tiger is not socially acceptable in every situation.
There's a rule when you're wearing costumes, you don't talk. So I have to show off my emotions by big gestures.
Some fursuiters are committed to maintaining the magic, and speaking in costume would break that magic. I think the no talking rule was something that more fursuiters used to adhere to more strictly, but not so much these days. Case in point, me. Even for the fursuiters who do speak, it's still advantageous to bolster the performance with big gestures, as most fursuit heads don't quite emote in the same way that a human face can.
Oh, it leaves me feeling great. You know, I'm just on a high the rest of the day. It really tires me out, and I'm real sweaty and stinky afterwards, but it gives me a real good feeling.
I can attest to that. Even just sitting in a fursuit can get tiring and hot real quick.
Every year, America's furry community congregates in Chicago for their annual Midwest Fur Convention, a strictly private affair where no cameras are permitted.
Why weren't cameras allowed? This documentary comes from a time in the furry fandom's history when most furry conventions' media policies were that no outside media were allowed into conventions, period. Back then, furry conventions were of the belief that any and all media presence at a convention was out to make furries look bad, and there was good reason to believe that at the time. The problem was that these blanket bans on outside media didn't stop film crews from finding furries outside of the conventions, sometimes literally standing outside of a convention, who were willing to cooperate with them and then putting a negative spin on the whole story anyways. Furry conventions have since allowed media back into convention spaces, but with strict limitations, such as only being allowed to film in the convention's common areas and not being allowed to point a camera from a hallway into a room they're not allowed to film inside. That all aside, the only nitpick I have with this part is that it gives the impression that this was the only furry convention in the world, when in reality, there were a lot of other furry conventions going on in the early 2000s.
I spend most of my time at the convention out of suit, only because I'm busy running around trying to see my friends that are there. Plus, there's certain panels that I put on showing how to act in fursuit, how to make the fursuits.
What Snap is describing is basically what furry conventions were like then and now. Typically, there are panels presented on various topics, merchants selling their wares, friends catching up with each other, and maybe some other scheduled events like fursuit parades. In retrospect, it's a bit of a shame they weren't able to get footage of the convention, but I'm glad they included Snap's description of what a furry convention is like.
Catman's also in town for the conference. He doesn't consider himself a fur, but he's made many furry friends online.
Is fur used correctly here? Yeah, it is. Snap used it earlier, remember?
As soon as I realized to myself that I was a fur,
it may not be as commonly used as furry, but the terms are interchangeable.
Nice to see you. Great to see you too.
all right, rock on. What you got going on there?
Okay, picked it up in Munich.
Oh, very cool.
Figured a plushie would work, eh?
That is cool. I dig that.
And
Oh boy, it was really interesting seeing him.
Rock on. Thanks a lot, man.
Cool.
All right.
You know, I just couldn't stop staring at the stitches in his head because I know how much that must have hurt.
I love that they show this. While Stalking Cat may not have been a furry and Snappy Tiger seems to have no interest in getting tattoos, they can still relate to one another because of their common connection to the tiger. This is basically what it's like when two furries meet up. Even if they don't share a common species, they can often instantly relate to each other because they're both furries.
The furries realize that the rest of the world finds them more than a little strange. But psychiatrists say being a little weird doesn't necessarily mean you've got a disorder.
Many people would think of punk rockers, for example, as being odd, in terms of their appearance, but not necessarily a disorder. And the other point being that they're accepted within their subculture. There are other individuals who share some similar passions, thoughts, urges, and fashion, and so they're not really isolated or alone.
I'm really glad they reinforced this point before ending the documentary. We furries are aware that this is not what people consider to be normal, and I'm glad that the sentiment is not just applied to the furries in the documentary. Now let's take a look at the review stats. Information accuracy is 86%, and the spirit is 75%, coming to an average of 81%. And now time for my thoughts. Animal Imitators was a great representation of furries and furry fandom, but not entirely without its flaws. Furry wasn't defined correctly, the way they described the convention made it seem like it was the only furry convention in the world, and I feel like they could have been a little bit more kind towards Wolftail. Just why? One last little bitty thing I wanted to mention. Fake fur doesn't grow back. That's why many fursuit owners will brush their fursuits backwards so that it doesn't pull out the fur. I didn't take this out of the score or anything, but I just wanted to point that out in case you didn't know. Like Sam had brought up earlier, I was initially worried that they brought in the psychiatrist only for his opinion on the furries and not for the people getting extreme body modifications. At least a fursuit can be taken off at the end of the day. But thankfully they also got his opinion of the other people shown in the documentary as well, so that nobody was singled out. Equal opportunity psychoanalysis. I also had another minor worry when they used these images. These photos were originally printed alongside an article published by Vanity Fair that primarily focused on the adult side of furry fandom in a very unflattering manner. Thankfully, Animal Imitators didn't take such a route, but seeing those photos had me worried there for a second. All those little gripes and worries aside, this documentary was still a very insightful glimpse into the world of furry fandom, especially when we consider that Vanity Fair's article and CSI's Furry episode both came out the same year this documentary was released on the Learning Channel. Back when the channel was about learning? Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me, Sam. Now, there is an argument that can be made that Animal Imitators and similar programs are little more than modern-day freak shows. I don't completely disagree with this, but I think it's important to note that Animal Imitators seems to make a conscious effort to educate its viewers, even if it is couched in examples of shocking human behavior. It seems to me that the filmmakers approached the process of making this documentary with the goal of being respectful towards their subjects. The expert opinions that are included are relevant, yet the audience is reminded that being weird doesn't equate to insanity. At the end of the day, I think Animal Imitators is a great depiction of furries. I think TLC did a fantastic job of showing these furries in such a way that any audience member should be able to easily understand their stories, empathize with them, and maybe come away with the realization that at the end of the day, we're not so different after all. Well, that's it for today's episode of Furries in the Media. Have fun, stay awesome, bye-bye!